good. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay. Alright, everything's set up with you.
Yep, we're good on audio. We're at
got everything.
between 24 and 26.
Lighting's checked.
12 and
board's
6.
Good.
Yep, good. Are we good to bring in Mr. Lane?
Yep.
All right. Mr. Lane, good morning. How are you?
I'm good, yeah.
If you could hop over here up on that seat. I'm the audio personnel. I will hook you up with your mic here. Just clips on right there.
All right.
Are you comfortable?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to need a sample if you could give me a few words or a sentence.
Hello?
Yep, we're good.
All right, that's...
Oh, Lane.
Hey, how you doing?
All right.
Good.
Everything situated right?
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Boss,
Yep.
we're good.
Alright, gentlemen, this is Lane Broderick, session 7, take 1, rolling. Keep it. Lights. Audio. Alright, hit it. Alright, Lane, this is the final sit down between you and I wanted to stress the overwhelming amount of appreciation that I have, actually that we all have for you doing this. Not only has it helped us with the Preservation of Melodrama project, but without sounding too glib, I've enjoyed getting to know you.
Yes, certainly.
So where we'd like to finish this realist odyssey is with your wife.
Taran?
Yes. Would you be willing to explain the origins of you two?
Like, just how we met?
Well, yes, but also the ending and really everything in between also.
Oh, yeah, sure, I can do that. Now?
Whenever you feel comfortable, Lane.
Okay. I can't start with some epic beginning, claiming how we were both born into rivaling gangs, or that we both dealt with some sort of tragedy that eventually brought us together. No. I can only begin with this beautifully normal situation that was handed to us. Taran and I attended the same school, high school that is, but she hadn't moved in until the beginning of senior year. This was a win because my awkwardness had hit an all-time high the year prior, so luckily she only got to see the remnants of a once lanky teen. Anywho, she moved in a couple of weeks before school started, and immediately caught my wandering eyes. She was pretty, but in her own sense, the type of pretty that you knew everyone agreed on, but no one would ask, just in case someone didn't believe she was attractive and some embarrassment would follow. It's tough to explain, but end point is, she had this look about her, and I still to this day can't describe it perfectly. She looked like someone that would be interested in me. So we both went about our senior year, and it didn't take much time for me to decide that I was going to ask her out. What did take me a while was strapping on a set and carrying out the planned action. I couldn't manage to do it until I started to pick up on the fact that we were locking eyes whenever we passed. Specifically after 4th, 6th, and 7th period. The best was 7th period because it was outside. You see, the absence of the fluorescent lights made this reflection of the sun do absolutely magical things with her hair. It was like when you're looking through a room for something, and the first time you finally see it, it's almost highlighted by your brain. It was this outrageously beautiful black natural hair, and she called it Auburn Night. So amidst the sea of boring brunettes and blondes, my Auburn Night was as prominent as ever. Continuing on, I mustered up the courage to ask her on September 18th that elephant memories never poached. Our first date was certainly not out of a storybook. It was actually pretty strange. She had this interesting enthusiasm towards death, not in a dark manner. She just simply liked the idea of what happens to a soul after the moment. So you know when you're done. So she drugged me along to the local church's mausoleum. I was kind of shocked by that idea. Hell, first thing I thought, the chick was batshit crazy. We stood there for probably 45 minutes, just looking at the thing. And I was stuck to what I'd say, and to this day I can't piece a set of words together that one human can say to another while staring at a building full of corpses, let alone on a first date. But one thing stayed with me, and that was a sense of comfort. I felt as though whatever weird things that I hid from the rest of the civilized world could be displayed on a pedestal to her. She wasn't a freak, nor was she some drugged-out hippie you'd see in a narcotic-based romance. She wasn't weird, she was just different. And right away, I knew that I loved her. But I remember a specific moment right in front of the mausoleum where Taran had recognized a marker that they had the same first name as me. Now, Lane usually isn't in the top baby name list, so it was just something goofy to think about. But with further investigation, we saw that this Lane had died at 19 years young. I wouldn't say that it shook me, but it certainly got me thinking. And she saw my hesitance toward the idea and decided to zero in on the topic. She explained to me that her idea of death was an end, and that's it. Now, she was raised Christian, And she never condemned the religion, she more or less just drifted away from it. So her philosophies were all self-teaching, which provided a bit of assurance in her that most would refer to as arrogance. But that assurance creeps into others as she talks, which became what I thought. So my idea of death soon began to become a twisted mystery of ends and beginnings. Like, look right there. One comment led me on a whole slew of thoughts and ideas, and that's how I knew I loved her. She could provide the absolute best of me with just the littlest of actions. So weeks passed and our interest in each other slowly transformed into a sweet, sweet love. I no longer had these spots of fear and awkwardness. I carried myself differently now. I had a passion that I cared very much for, which turned into confidence that I had never had. Life was good. 3 months passed, and we were inseparable. I can show you all the school newspapers for proof we were everyone's favorite couple. Taran provided that edgy form of social commentary some may just call being mean, while I was the calming force in the back wearing a smile. Our families were also decently close, meaning that they weren't the Hatfields and McCoys, and we could act civilly around each other during outdoor barbecues and, holiday dinners and whatnot, because that's how you could measure whether or not a relationship was legitimate at the time. But the most distinct moment I can remember that time, the time before the wreck, was one date we went on. I had this decent night planned for us, movies, some burritos, and on my way to pick her up, I got this terrible phone call. She's crying, hyperventilating, and I'm just trying to calm her down, and I can't understand a word she's saying. So I zip over to her house and run to the door, and as I'm about 3 feet from the house, she bursts through and collapses on top of me. She's basically hysterical, and she's just screaming and pleading for me to drive to the mausoleum. So I have no clue, but I decide to take her, and we just sat. I knew that she was going to talk about it, but just not then. So I didn't push. We sat there for hours, and she just held my hand. And finally she turns to me, just as the sun was falling behind the car, and just pukes a story onto me that I'll never forget. Her father was a great man. He cared for her very much, and he ran the house to a T. But they started to notice his mood change from a bright character to a more melancholy figure. He was tired and he was getting sick often. And after a while, they took a trip to the ER when he collapsed on the tennis court while playing with Taran. He was eventually diagnosed with MS. Now take it, I had no clue what the disease was, nor did I see it take effect on him because he had missed out on the once-a-year Thanksgiving dinner. And I rarely entered the house when I picked her up. So I'm just sitting there like some idiot who didn't know a thing about his girlfriend's family. But I wish the story stopped there. After a few weeks of testing, her mother began to act different, almost in a secretive manner. Taran, being the cynic that she was, began to investigate and found what really was going on. That day, she stayed quietly in the basement so that it seemed like she wasn't home, waited, and found her mom with some asshole up in the bedroom. And that's when the call came my way. Here, her father, her role model, is fighting for his life and his independence, and her mom just takes the easy way out and finds someone else instead of staying and supporting him. It just tore her apart, and soon her family. And that night was simply the interlude before the destruction. The best thing I could do for her was to provide a few hours of mindless fun and romance, so I did. We walked over the path that a much younger us took before, and soaked in all the nostalgia. By the time we reached the end of the first date we went on, she pulled me over to this rundown bandstand in the woods. It sort of had this feel to it that it once was a happening place where people collected for shows and small concerts, a place where people were happy. But now it's just a structure where birds and squirrels, made their homes. So anywho, she climbed up to the top part and laid down on her stomach. I didn't trust it, so I yelled at her, and she sat back up, and I stayed down. But I had to be in contact with her for some reason. So I reached up on my tiptoes and every strength in my vein to pull myself up just to be able to touch her. She reaches down, and we stop there, just holding hands, staring into each other's eyes as if it was the only place to look. It was a moment of solace and peace that would stay with me, no matter what was going on, no matter how great our past was, no matter how poor the future looked. We had this odd place to look back on as a place to ourselves. And that's just something I wish that would have stayed with both of us. From that point on, she became more and more distant from me. She was never really excited to hang out, and the conversations were really just attempts by me to make it seem normal. I would push question after question and try to start her up, but nothing worked. And soon it seemed as though that every conversation was me asking how she was feeling, and every 20 minutes later I'd get a fine. The texts and the calls eventually stopped, and I was in a depression. Our relationship was basically over, and I couldn't even say it was someone's fault. I would have done anything to be able to hate her, but I couldn't. She didn't do anything wrong. She was simply a product of her environment and those around her. So I spent a few months of my senior year eventually tracking all of her movements instead of enjoying my last year with my buddies. It definitely didn't start as an obsession, but it's safe to say now, after all these years, that it became one. I wasn't right. I did all those things expecting that knowing what she did would bring her back to me. It wasn't some selfless act of making sure that she was okay with it. It was for me, to start my relationship back up and to become happy again. My grades fell and my care was non-existent. I started looking to other ways to drown the sorrow. So bottles replaced laughs, bowl packs replaced love, and crushed pills took the place of my once happy-go-lucky self. God.
You need a minute? Yeah, someone grabbing the tissue or something. Here.
No. Thank you. I'm alright, but it's just sad in itself. But what comes next is the moment that it just haunts me every time I think of it. On the night of June 12th, I planned to kill myself. I wrote a note explaining that there was no point for me to grudge on the school if all I was going to do was track her down as my major. I was ripped apart. My family knew that I was a lost cause, so I grabbed a bottle of 12 oxys and I was going to down them. For some reason, I kept expecting something to happen outside though. Maybe she'd come running in pleading for my help just like she did that night. But I knew reality would set in, so I opened the bottle and poured out those saviors. I had lost faith in God, humanity, and myself. But then it happened. I heard this terrible crash outside the house, and then, in the most serendipitous way, I looked out, and it was Taran, a bloody mess, lying beside her destroyed car. Something had caused her to veer off the street, maybe a cat or a rabbit, but it didn't matter, which led to her hitting this gate entrance by the graveyard by my house. And I was in this adrenaline-induced shock, sprinting outside to see if she was still breathing. My God, she was messed up, but she still had the look about her. Even when she was unconscious. That sounded a bit creepier than I wanted, but okay, continuing on. Anywho, I couldn't believe it. Seconds before I ended it, the love of my life stumbles before me. It was an act of God holding my face and screaming at me to reform. And I did just that. A new faith in me was built, a faith that was based on the idea that God takes these strange routes and that you don't always have to understand, but they are there to test you and push you to the limits that you had no idea of prior to. A once suicidal, weak boy became a man in just moments. And I pulled her off the ground and was screaming for someone to call an ambulance. And she was barely hanging on to life. Each breath was weaker than the one before. Cuts all over her face from flying through the windshield and a nasty break in her right arm. But all of those serious injuries, it just didn't faze me. Because in my mind, she wasn't close to death. I had just seen death, and it was a much sadder appearance than she. No one was dying. I was born again. And I held her till the ambulance came, and I rode in the back. And it wasn't standard for me to be back there, but the EMTs allowed it for some reason. I stayed with her the entire night, and both families came to the hospital the next morning. She awoke to me, basically exhausted beyond belief, half laying on her bed trying to get just a moment of shut-eye. She was sort of surprised, but not scared. She felt all right there, and woke me up. She asked me what had happened, and just as I began, her dad rolled in on a wheelchair with her mom pushing him and explained what happened. They basically went over the police report of the wreck, and most importantly, they talked about how I had saved her. She looked at me without saying a word, and at that moment, I was back at the mausoleum. I found that place of comfort again, staring into her eyes. Things soon became good again. Her road to rehabilitation, it was a decently long one, but I was more than willing to be there the entire time. Our physical therapy routines eventually turned into dates, and soon we were back to where we once were. The wreck opened her eyes to what can happen, and it nudged her towards a steady relationship with someone that cared about her. I remember one night, We were walking along this dirt path, and she broke her silence on what had happened between us. She explained that when seeing how her mom treated her father, she realized that she could easily do the same to me in a time of need. So she decided to abort the relationship before it got any further. She was scared of letting me down, when the entire time I would have done anything to just the opportunity for her to let me down. Just a moment where we were together. Life as a whole got a lot better, and things were looking up. We both decided to go on to this liberal arts school just down the road from our high school. We spent the next 4 years working together and building our relationship. We were in love once again, and by that, I don't mean that it was gone. It simply was lost, looking for any route to get back in our eyes. Life was good. No, I'll say that ever since that wreck, life has been perfect. Not that it ever wasn't perfect. It just wasn't to my liking. But I lived. So there you go. Not a real elaborate tale, but a good story.
I think we all might need a moment to take that in, but wow, Lane, that wasn't just a good story, but probably one of the best things I've ever heard.
Well, I'm certainly glad you enjoyed it, but if I may, what is this all about?
Excellent. Well, I guess it is time we explain. Lane, are you familiar with the Avia daughter?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've seen it on the news. It's all they're going on about, everything that they think they can do with it and whatnot.
So you're aware of the capabilities?
I guess you could say that. Is it true that we'll be able to go back?
Yes it is. Now, a very important project has been placed on us, and we need a subject for the idea.
Me, I'm assuming?
Yes, we did a bit of research on you and decided after a rigorous recruiting system that you, Lane, are the best selection for testing this device out.
I don't think I'm getting what you're saying. You want to change my past?
In the most blunt way possible, yes. We see that the time after the first breakup to the wreck as a negative force on you today. So our plan is to go back and avoid the original breakup in the first place.
Well, how do you plan on doing that?
Convincing Taran's mother to stay at her lover's house so that in turn she would never find out truly what was going on and would never break up with you in fear of hurting you. With her findings, it's pretty concrete and you'll still end up very happily with her.
No, thank you.
No thank you? To what?
To your idea. I mean, I get where you guys are coming from, definitely. But to change that would have changed the entire dynamic.
But it would avoid your drug abuse and depression. That's something you want to remain?
Absolutely. You see, that's what makes me who I am today. That's the moment that God took me to the edge of the cliff and He pushed me even further. You see, that's what my entire faith is focused on. Proverbs 3, verses 5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understandings. In all your ways acknowledge Him, for He will make your path straight. You see? You don't need a human hand in there with this, whatever you guys are doing to make things pretty and satisfying. You don't, because we're all a part of His plan. God and the universe have a way of working things out. And no matter how tough or how long it takes, you got to understand that the sad ones, they have the stories to tell. Every mistake, every misstep is a muse and a motivation for the next great piece of art, the next great idea. That's what we're built from. And to create this perfect past that you guys want now will ruin everything. It'll destroy everything that we hold true, everything that makes us who we are. It'll ruin us.
This isn't really what we were expecting. Are you without a doubt certain that this isn't what you want to happen?
Without a doubt.
I told you, this should have never happened.
Please calm down.
What?
Shit, Matt, this is bad, man. We screwed up. How is this renewable? Is this renewable?
What's going on? What?
Lane, it'll be all right.
No, it's.
We just need to get everyone calm.
Why? No. Why? You start explaining to me what is going on right now. Why are they going berserk?
Okay, everyone, please. This is tough enough as it is. Lane, we already used the Avia daughter in a field test.
I don't understand.
When we were researching how we could use this device in an actual purpose, we brought up a large amount of suicide victims, and yours stuck out to us as the most personal and easily fixable.
Suicide victim? What are you talking about?
Lane, please stay with me and understand what I'm about
No,
to
you
say.
start
Lane, that night of June 12th, you overdosed on Oxycontin and were found the morning after by your mother and brother. You died, Lane. And all of these years later, with this technology, we found that we could have helped you. So we went back and we forced Taran into an accident in front of your house. Through a series of meticulously plotted events, we veered her car off the road to wreck and give you new hope. This change lane occurred yesterday at 1:30 in the afternoon. It was an experiment and it succeeded. We created a happy life from a terrible ending.
No. You have no right. You have no justification. If my life ended that night, then it ended. Okay? There's no redos. There's no alterations made by technology. There's no some punk ass kids that think that they can go back and play God. If God wanted me to die that night, then I died. And if I did, then it was over. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be here.